I never thought I'd be the wealthy one in the family. But here I am at 46, looking back at the years that led me here. After years of hard work, some lucky breaks and smart investments, I'd finally achieved the kind of financial security most people only dream of. For the first time, I could not only cover my own expenses comfortably, but also share my good fortune with my family. And oh, did they notice? At first, my family was thrilled. I remember the joy on my brother's face when I told him his mortgage was handled. He couldn't believe it. My nieces and nephews were already talking about their college dreams, and knowing I could make that happen felt incredible. So without hesitation, I set up college funds for each of them. And it didn't stop there. I funded a big family vacation, the kind of all-inclusive getaway that seemed impossible for our family until now. We laughed, bonded, and spent time together on that trip in a way we hadn't in years. It felt good, really good, to be able to give back to the people I loved. Seeing them smile, knowing that I had taken away some of their financial stress, was worth every penny. I thought I was doing the right thing, showing that I valued my family over money. And honestly, I hoped that this generosity would be the last chapter, that everyone would be content and grateful, and we'd move forward with nothing but love and understanding between us. But looking back, I can't help but wonder if that was the beginning of my family seeing me differently. I thought that helping my family out financially would be the end of their struggles, and the beginning of a closer, more supportive relationship with them. But I quickly learned that, for some people, generosity only fuels a desire for more. Just when I was starting to feel settled, like I'd done all I could to help, my sister-in-law Julie made it her mission to push every boundary I thought I'd set. At first, I brushed it off as a misunderstanding. Julie and I weren't particularly close, but I thought we had a mutual respect, especially after everything I'd done for the family. I'd already covered my own mortgage, made sure each of my nieces and nephews had a solid college fund, and even treated everyone to that dream vacation we'd never thought possible. But soon after the vacation, Julie started hinting about wanting another one, this time for her own family. Just her, my brother, and their kids. And when I say hinting, I mean it started innocently enough with comments about how much her kids just loved the last trip, and how amazing it would be for them to have a special family trip. I played along, smiling, saying how glad I was they had such a great time. I thought she was just reminiscing, but over time, the comments became more specific. Julie began dropping details, resorts, dates, prices, even activities. She'd bring it up during casual family get-togethers, even in front of my parents and siblings, weaving it into conversations so smoothly it felt impossible to address directly without making things awkward. Finally, during one family dinner, she dropped the full request, out in the open, with everyone watching. You know, a $35,000 all-inclusive trip would be perfect for us. And since you've already done so much for everyone else, we thought maybe you'd like to help us make this dream a reality. I stared at her, stunned. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my response. My mind raced. $35,000? I had no problem helping out with meaningful expenses like education or a home. But a vacation like that? It was unnecessary. Extravagant even, especially since they had just enjoyed a vacation on my dime. I glanced around, hoping someone would say something, maybe remind Julie of everything I'd already done for them. But there was nothing, just silence, and those expectant eyes. Julie, I started, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm so glad you all enjoyed the last trip, but I think we need to keep things in perspective. I've tried to help everyone with things that really matter, homes, education, things that change lives. I can't keep funding every family dream. Julie didn't take this well. She crossed her arms, leaned back, and rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed. Oh, come on. You can afford it. You have so much now, and we deserve a break too. It's not like it would even make a dent in your finances. Besides, you already paid for the others to have a vacation. What's the big deal about doing it one more time? Her words stung. In her eyes, my wealth had turned from a generous gesture into a bottomless pit of cash, and my obligation to her seemed endless. I realized then that, to Julie, I wasn't a family member anymore. I was a resource, and no amount of giving would ever satisfy her. The tension at the table was thick, and I knew if I kept arguing, it would just make things worse. So I just smiled tightly, gave her a firm no, and quickly changed the subject, hoping to smooth things over. But deep down, I could feel the shift, one I couldn't ignore any longer. My generosity was no longer appreciated. It was expected, and I had to decide how far I was willing to let them push me. As if things weren't already uncomfortable between Julie and me, she didn't take my initial refusal well at all. Her hints about a family trip had evolved into a fixation, and she seemed determined to pressure me into paying for this vacation. I thought maybe after I said no at that family dinner, she'd let it go and see my side of things. But if anything, my refusal only seemed to make her more determined. A few weeks later, we had another family gathering, a birthday celebration for one of the kids. I'd gone with a small gift and a smile, hoping for a relaxed evening without any tension. But the moment I arrived, I sensed that Julie hadn't dropped her demands. I caught her glancing over at me with a smirk every so often, whispering to a few of the other family members. It was hard to ignore, but I did my best, pretending not to notice her pointed stares. Then, during dinner, as everyone was chatting and laughing, Julie cleared her throat loudly, a clear signal that she wanted attention. She turned to me, smiling sweetly, but there was a sharpness in her eyes. "So," she began, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "when are you going to give us a straight answer about that vacation?" My stomach dropped. I could feel the entire table's attention shift to me. I managed to keep my expression neutral, but inside, I was furious. We'd already had this conversation, and yet, here she was, dragging it out in front of everyone, using the family gathering as a stage for her demands. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my tone calm. "Julie, I thought I'd made myself clear. I've already helped out a lot, and I can't fund a vacation like that. It's not reasonable." Her smile faded instantly, replaced by a look of disbelief, as if I'd just announced I was abandoning the family entirely. She looked around the table, appealing to the others for support. "Can you believe this?" she scoffed, her voice dripping with exasperation. "Here she is, sitting on a pile of money, and she can't even help her own family out with a little vacation. It's not like I'm asking for much." It stung, more than I wanted to admit. I looked around at my other family members, hoping someone might step in, or even show some sign of support. But they all avoided eye contact, glancing down at their plates or at their drinks, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to get involved. Julie, on the other hand, seemed to take their silence as an invitation to go further. She leaned in, lowering her voice just enough that it felt more personal, more pointed. "I mean, after everything we've done for you over the years, you'd think a bit of gratitude would be in order. Or is your money too precious to share with the people who helped you get where you are?" I clenched my fists under the table. I wanted to defend myself, to remind her that no one had helped me build my wealth. I'd done it on my own, through hard work, discipline, and sacrifice. But I knew that saying that aloud would only fan the flames. So instead, I took another steadying breath and said, "Julie, I've always been happy to help with what truly matters. But I'm not obligated to fund everything." She crossed her arms, clearly unimpressed. "Fine, whatever. I just hope you remember this the next time you want support from us. Family should come first, you know." The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The rest of the evening was awkward, with everyone avoiding the elephant in the room. I felt drained and defeated by the end of it. I left the party with a sinking feeling, realizing that this was just the beginning of a much bigger problem. At that point, I realized things were spiraling in a direction I hadn't anticipated. The subtle remarks, the offhand comments, all of it had escalated. Julie's demands had only become bolder, and it was clear she felt somehow entitled to my money. Maybe it was the visible success I'd achieved, or maybe it was because I'd already been generous. Whatever it was, the expectation had grown, and with it my resentment. One evening, after yet another call from Julie hinting, no, outright stating, that I owed her family this vacation, I decided it was time to put my foot down. Calm but firm, I made it clear that I wouldn't be funding any more luxuries, especially not a $35,000 vacation, regardless of how she spun it. "Julie," I said, steadying my voice, "I've helped out when it was needed, but I'm not obligated to provide for everything. My success doesn't entitle anyone to make demands on my finances. Her reaction was swift and biting. It's easy for you to say, she sneered. When you have so much, you have no idea how hard the rest of us have it. I felt a flash of irritation, but I kept my tone level. Maybe so, but I worked hard for this. And I've already done more than enough for everyone. That wasn't the answer she wanted. She went quiet for a moment, then muttered, almost to herself, I just don't see why you have to be so stingy. It's just money. The casual dismissal of all the effort, late nights, and sacrifices I'd made to get here stung more than I cared to admit. It became clear in that moment that no amount of generosity would ever be enough. Even after that conversation, the entitlement only deepened, spreading through the family like wildfire. Before I knew it, others started making requests, some subtle, others not so much. It was as if by setting a boundary, I'd suddenly become the villain of the family. My refusal was taken as an affront, almost a betrayal, and it was painful to see family members I cared about join in, each with their own demands and expectations. But something inside me shifted. It was the lack of gratitude, the way they spoke as though my money was their right rather than a gift. I finally saw it for what it was, not just a difference of opinion, but a toxic, draining attitude I hadn't noticed until it was too late. I realized that no matter what I gave, some people would never be satisfied, and that the cost of giving in again would be losing any respect I had left. The situation, as I had feared, only worsened after my refusal to fund Julie's vacation. Once the door was opened, the floodgates burst wide open, and more family members began to follow suit, making their own demands, each one more audacious than the last. What had started as a request for a vacation soon transformed into a series of escalating expectations, none of which I had ever imagined in my wildest dreams. It started innocuously enough, with small comments here and there. One of my cousins, who had always been friendly, now suddenly had an interest in discussing her own financial troubles. You know, she said, as we were chatting over a casual family barbecue, it must be nice to have enough to cover everyone's college fund. You know, I've been thinking about my kids' future. And with tuition these days, maybe you could help with that too. Her tone was so sweet, so innocent, that I almost didn't register what she was implying at first. But then the words sank in, and I felt the weight of her suggestion. She wasn't asking, she was implying that my wealth should be shared. I tried to brush it off, but before I could even process it, her husband chimed in, as though they'd practiced the line together. Yeah, tuition is a killer these days. It would be great if you could help out, especially since you're in such a good position now. They weren't subtle at all. It wasn't a casual conversation. It was a demand, cloaked in a veneer of politeness. I forced a smile, trying to play it off as a joke. I've already helped, but I'm not in the business of funding everyone's college funds, I said with a forced chuckle. But deep down, I felt the sting of their expectation. As the weeks passed, the demands only grew. It wasn't just college tuition anymore. Now it was a holiday home. I had one of my uncles, someone who had always been friendly, or at least I thought so, pull me aside at a family dinner. You know, with the way property values are going up, it would be a great investment if you bought a holiday house for the family, he said, almost casually, as though it was the most natural request in the world. The kids could come. The whole family would be able to get away together. It would be nice, don't you think? The audacity of it was almost too much to process. A holiday home? A second home, on top of everything else I'd already given? But it didn't stop there. The constant demands were wearing me down. Every family event, every dinner, seemed to be a new opportunity for someone else to hint or outright ask for financial help. Some were more direct than others. My sister, who'd been nothing but kind to me in the past, sat me down one evening and said, you know, I've always wanted to go back to school. Maybe you could pay for that too. It's not that I'm asking for much, but it would really help me out. Her voice quivered just slightly, a mix of vulnerability and expectation that I couldn't ignore. But by now, I was numb to it all. I've already done a lot for everyone, I reminded her, my voice tight. I'm not saying I won't help in the future, but I can't continue to fund everyone's dreams and expectations. But the most jarring part was the way my refusal seemed to fracture the family dynamic. People began to look at me differently, almost as if I were the villain in their story. The guilt tripping started. "Don't you want to help your family?" They'd whisper behind my back. And when I walked into the room, conversations would suddenly fall silent. The distance between me and the people I'd once considered close grew palpable, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. It felt like I was being punished for having the means to help but choosing not to. The tension reached its peak when Julie, emboldened by my refusal, began to rally others to her cause. She'd make remarks, subtly undermining me in front of the family, painting me as a selfish, money-hungry person who only cared about herself. It was hard to sit through, even more so because I could see the others nodding along, agreeing with her behind my back. I could feel the judgment in their eyes, as if they were all silently condemning me for daring to say no. I knew that by not giving in, I had become the black sheep of the family, but it didn't make it any easier. The endless demands were like a slow drip, wearing away at my resolve, and I started questioning whether I'd done the right thing. Was I being too harsh? Should I have given more, even if it meant continuing down a path of endless financial obligation? The emotional toll it was taking was immense, but at the same time, I knew deep down that I couldn't keep giving, not without feeling like I was losing myself in the process. The worst part was realizing that some of these people didn't see me as family anymore. They saw me as a resource, something to be used until it was no longer convenient. And as the requests became more and more outrageous, I started to wonder how far they would go. Would they demand my entire savings next? The fear of what might come next weighed on me, but I couldn't back down. I'd already given too much to let myself be consumed by their greed. The tension reached an explosive boiling point during a seemingly ordinary family gathering. What began as casual conversations about money had escalated into something far darker. The entitlement of my relatives had been festering for weeks, and I knew I had reached my limit. I had tried to stay composed, tried to offer kind but firm refusals to their demands. But now, it was like the floodgates had been opened, and there was no turning back. That day, we had gathered at my cousin's house for a barbecue. It was supposed to be a light-hearted, enjoyable evening, but from the moment I arrived, I could feel the undercurrent of hostility. The family was divided. Some awkwardly avoided eye contact with me, while others made sure to offer their comments about my selfishness. I felt a growing unease in the pit of my stomach, like I was walking through a minefield, waiting for the inevitable explosion. It didn't take long for the conversation to veer back to the same topic, money. I was cornered in the kitchen by my uncle, a man who I had always considered to be a voice of reason in the family. He was the kind of guy who would give you the shirt off his back if you needed it, or so I thought. But that day, his tone was sharp and demanding, no longer the caring family member I had known. "You've got the money," he said bluntly, his face tightening with frustration. "We all know you've been helping everyone, but this isn't just about college funds or a vacation. We need more. We've always been here for you, so why can't you be there for us?" His words hit me like a slap. It was as if everything I had done, the mortgages paid off, the tuition funds, the vacations for the family, meant nothing. To them, it was simply a starting point, not an end. They expected more, and the pressure was relentless. I tried to remain calm, but my patience was wearing thin. "I've done enough," I replied firmly, hoping to put an end to the conversation. "I've helped where I can, but I am not a bottomless pit of money. This isn't about being selfish, it's about boundaries." That's when the situation took a turn I never saw coming. My uncle's face flushed with anger, his grip tightening on the countertop. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" His voice was low, but there was no mistaking the fury behind it. "We've helped you, we've supported you, and this is how you repay us." The words came out like a venomous hiss, and I could feel the room getting smaller, more suffocating. I tried to back away, my heart pounding, but before I could even react, he lunged at me. The next few seconds were a blur. He grabbed my arm, pulling me toward him, as if to force me to listen to him. No, to make me feel the weight of his anger. I struggled, shocked and disoriented, but I couldn't get away. The room seemed to spin, the sounds of my family's voices fading into the background. The physical force of it stunned me, This was family, people who I had supported, people who were supposed to love me. By the time I managed to free myself, my heart was racing, and my breath was shallow. I could feel the sting of humiliation and betrayal in every corner of my being. It wasn't just the physical assault that hurt. It was the realization that these people, these family members who I thought cared about me, were willing to turn violent over money. It was a blow I never expected. The chaos didn't end there. A few family members witnessed the scene and immediately began arguing with each other, some trying to calm my uncle down, others taking his side. The air was thick with tension, and it was clear that the family was fracturing beyond repair. Some of my relatives started shouting at each other, accusing one another of being disloyal, selfish, or greedy. The sound of raised voices echoed through the house, and I could barely hear my own thoughts over the cacophony. It was then that someone called the police. I wasn't sure who, but the sirens grew louder as they approached the house. In the midst of the chaos, I felt a strange numbness wash over me. I wasn't even sure what I was hoping for anymore. The police arrived quickly, but by the time they got there, the damage was already done. My uncle was subdued, and my cousins were arguing with the officers, trying to explain that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. The aftermath was a blur of confusion and frustration. Several of my relatives were given fines for breaking social distancing regulations, as many of them had gathered too closely together without masks, violating the local mandates. Some of the cousins who had been closest to the incident fled the scene before the authorities arrived, refusing to face the consequences of their actions. As the dust settled, I stood there shocked, my mind racing with questions. How had it come to this? How had I gone from helping my family to being physically assaulted by them? How had their greed and entitlement spiraled so completely out of control? The night ended with an air of uncomfortable silence. People began to leave, some with a look of guilt on their faces, while others seemed completely unfazed. But for me, the damage was done. I knew that I could never go back to the way things were, no matter how much I wanted to. What was supposed to be a family event had turned into a nightmare, and I was left to pick up the pieces, not just of the broken relationships, but of the trust I'd once placed in these people. The reality was hard to face. The family I had once loved had become strangers, driven by their sense of entitlement and greed. As the days passed after the chaotic confrontation at the family gathering, I couldn't shake the weight of everything that had happened. The tension in my chest felt like a constant companion, a reminder of the fractured family I had left behind. I tried to hold on to the conviction that I had done the right thing, but the guilt was an unwelcome guest that refused to leave. In the midst of all the turmoil, there was one person who stood by me without hesitation: my husband, Daniel. He had always been my rock, the one person who had my back no matter what. But even as I stood firm in my decision to stop financially supporting my entitled relatives, I could see that the situation had affected him as much as it had affected me. The rift in the family, the emotional chaos, the police involvement. It was hard to ignore the toll it had taken on all of us. Daniel was supportive, but he also recognized the emotional cost. He knew that I had always been generous, often to the point of overextending myself for the sake of family. He had watched me pour my heart and soul into trying to make everyone happy, even at the expense of my own well-being. And now, he saw the same family turn against me, demanding more, treating me as if my wealth was an endless well to draw from. "I know this isn't easy," he said one night, his voice gentle but firm. "But you did the right thing. You can't keep giving to people who don't appreciate it. We've given them more than enough, and now they're taking advantage of your kindness." I appreciated his words, but they didn't make the guilt go away. The hardest part wasn't the demands. It was the emotional toll of saying no to people I had known my whole life. It wasn't easy to reject my family, even if they were acting entitled and disrespectful. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. If I kept giving in to their expectations, I would only continue to enable their toxic behavior. I just never imagined it would get to this point. I confessed to Daniel one evening, my voice wavering with the raw emotion I had been trying to suppress. I thought they would always be grateful, that they would appreciate everything I've done for them. But now, it feels like I'm the villain in their eyes. Daniel pulled me into a hug, his arms strong and comforting around me. "You're not the villain. You've done more than enough. And anyone who can't see that isn't someone you need in your life." His words were comforting, but the reality of the situation was hard to escape. The family division felt so final, so absolute. I wasn't just turning away from my relatives. I was severing ties with people who had once been a significant part of my life. The emotional conflict was overwhelming. Could I live with the consequences of my decision? Would things ever go back to normal? Or was this the end of everything I had once known? The thought of never speaking to some of my relatives again was a painful one. Despite everything, I still loved them. And the idea that I might never be able to repair the relationships felt like a deep wound I couldn't ignore. But deep down, I knew I had made the right choice. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about boundaries, respect, and the need to protect my peace. Daniel was right, as much as it hurt. I had been kind, generous, and supportive for years, but at some point, I had to draw a line. I couldn't keep sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of others who weren't willing to respect me. It wasn't my job to save the family from their own entitlement. Still, the guilt lingered, gnawing at me in quiet moments. I knew that my decision had caused a fracture that might never heal. But as I sat with Daniel, I realized that the only way forward was to focus on what I could control. I needed to let go of the guilt and trust that in time, the people who truly valued me would remain in my life, while those who saw me as nothing more than a source of money would eventually fade away. It wasn't easy, but I was slowly starting to come to terms with it. The division had been painful, but sometimes, walking away from toxic relationships was the only way to preserve your own well-being. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about everything I had learned. The lesson was clear. Money could only buy so much. True support, true family, came from love and respect, not from entitlement and greed. I had made the right decision, even if it meant facing the pain of losing people I once thought I could count on. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but with Daniel by my side, I knew I wasn't alone. Together, we would rebuild and move forward, not just for the sake of our marriage, but for our own peace of mind. And I was beginning to realize that peace was worth more than anything money could buy. In the weeks that followed, I found myself waking up in the middle of the night, my mind racing with thoughts about everything that had transpired. The weight of the decisions I had made felt heavier with each passing day, and the guilt was starting to take its toll. Despite the clarity I had in my mind, that I was not obligated to continue supporting my family beyond the initial help, I couldn't escape the sinking feeling in my chest. It was as if I had crossed a line that couldn't be undone, and I couldn't shake the image of my relatives' faces when I said no. The family I had once given everything for had turned into a battleground, and I was left standing in the middle, questioning if I had made the right call. The internal struggle was real. On one hand, I knew that my generosity had been taken for granted, that I had been pressured into doing more and more for people who were not appreciative. I had spent years pouring my money into supporting relatives who seemed to think my wealth was an endless resource, one they could keep demanding from without any sense of gratitude. After paying off mortgages, setting up college funds, and even gifting vacations, I had finally reached my breaking point. I had given them more than enough. But in the quiet moments, the guilt crept in like a shadow. What if I could have done more? What if my refusal to continue helping caused irreparable damage to the relationships I had with people who had been close to me for so long? These questions played on repeat in my mind, feeding the guilt that seemed to grow with every passing day. I couldn't stop replaying the family confrontation in my head. The looks of shock and anger when I refused the extravagant vacation request, the raised voices, the accusations of being selfish. It all felt like a bad dream. But it was real. And no matter how many times I tried to rationalize my actions, the nagging feeling that I had destroyed my connection with my family lingered. I tried talking to Daniel about it. He was my anchor throughout all of this, the one person who understood the emotional toll I was going through. But even his words of support, reminding me that I had done the right thing, didn't seem to ease the guilt that gripped me. "You've been there for them for so long," he said gently one evening. "You're not a bank. You're a person with your own life, your own dreams. They need to respect that." His support was comforting, but it didn't take away the heaviness in my heart. I felt like I had betrayed my family. After everything I had done for them, it was as if the bond we shared had been erased in a single moment of standing my ground. Could I really walk away from them? Was it too late to mend things? These were the thoughts that kept me awake at night, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. The hardest part wasn't even the financial strain. It was the emotional disconnection. I realized that for years, I had been using my money to fill the gaps in my relationships. I had been trying to buy love, to buy affection, because I thought that was the only way to keep the people around me happy. But now, standing firm in my decision to no longer be a source of unlimited funds, I felt the true cost of my generosity. The family rift wasn't just about money. It was about the realization that I had allowed myself to be used, to be taken for granted, and now, I was facing the consequences. Despite my internal conflict, I knew that I was not obligated to continue providing for everyone, especially after the way some of my relatives had acted. But the guilt was like a constant companion, reminding me of the faces of the people I had grown up with, the ones who had once been a part of my life in a way that felt real. How could I have thought they would appreciate everything I had done for them, when they had only seen me as a source of financial support? Still, a part of me wondered, if I had just given a little more, would they have been content? Would the demands ever have stopped? Or would they have just escalated, as they always seemed to do? No matter how much I tried to convince myself that I had made the right choice, the guilt gnawed at me. The thought of the family I had distanced myself from, the relatives I had cut off because they couldn't see past my wealth, haunted me. Was I truly in the right? Or had I just destroyed something that could never be repaired? But as time passed, I started to understand something important. I realized that I had been playing the role of the savior for too long, constantly trying to please everyone at my own expense. It was not selfish to protect my own happiness and financial security. I was entitled to my own life, my own peace of mind. And if my family couldn't understand that, then maybe they weren't the people I thought they were. As I wrestled with these feelings, I slowly began to feel a shift within myself. The guilt didn't disappear overnight, but I started to recognize that it was a natural part of the process. I had made a difficult choice, one that would have lasting consequences. But I was also learning to accept that sometimes, standing up for myself was the most important thing I could do, not just for my own well-being, but for my family's too. I wasn't their ATM. I wasn't obligated to solve their problems, especially when they weren't willing to put in the effort themselves. It was a hard truth to face, but it was one I needed to accept if I was ever going to find peace with my decision. Despite everything, I knew that I had done the best I could, and that was enough. The rift may have been painful, but it was necessary. And as time went on, I would find a way to heal, to move forward, and to live my life on my terms. As time passed, I found myself returning to the same thought over and over again. What if I had given more? What if I had simply set aside more funds to appease them, to quell the constant demands, to restore some semblance of peace? There was a part of me that still believed I could make it right by giving them what they wanted, that maybe they would stop pressuring me if I just threw more money their way. I had already given so much, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I could do more, that I could fix everything with just one more generous gesture. But then the deeper questions started to creep in. Would giving them more really solve the problem? Or would it only reinforce the entitlement they had shown? Would it teach them that they could always rely on me to bail them out, to fix their problems with my wealth, without any sense of appreciation or responsibility on their part? I had already done so much for them, and the way they had acted, especially during that disastrous confrontation, made it clear that they didn't see me as someone deserving of respect. They saw me as a walking, talking ATM, and the more I gave, the more they seemed to expect. This thought left me feeling conflicted. Part of me wanted to believe that setting aside more money, more resources, would bring an end to the pressure, that it would restore the balance. Maybe they would appreciate it. Maybe they would finally see my efforts as enough, and we could move forward as a family. No more tensions, no more harsh words. But deep down I knew the truth. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about something far deeper: respect, gratitude, and boundaries. Could I really continue to give, knowing that it might never be enough? Could I keep sacrificing my peace of mind and my financial security just to try to keep the peace with people who didn't appreciate me in the first place? I had to admit to myself that no amount of money could replace the respect I had lost, nor could it heal the rift that had grown between us. The more I gave, the more they took, and the more I felt like I was losing myself in the process. The truth hit me hard. The problem wasn't that I hadn't given enough. The problem was that I had given too much. I had allowed myself to be used, to be taken for granted, and I had neglected my own needs in favor of trying to fix everything for everyone else. And now, I was left with a family that had become a source of emotional strain rather than support. The realization was liberating in a way, though painful. I had to face the fact that my generosity had been misunderstood, that my attempts to be a good sister, a good daughter, a good wife, had led me to a place where my kindness was taken as a given, a currency that could be spent without any regard for the emotional cost. It wasn't enough anymore to just be the person who gave. I needed to be the person who said no, who set boundaries, who understood that my worth wasn't measured by how much I could provide. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I understood that it wasn't about appeasing anyone anymore. It wasn't about giving until I was drained, until my own dreams and desires were put on hold to make sure everyone else was happy. It was about standing up for myself, about putting my own needs first, and about learning to say no without guilt. I realized that by continuing to give, I would only be reinforcing the toxic pattern of entitlement that had been festering for so long. I had to break the cycle, for my own sake, for the sake of my family's respect, and for my peace of mind. Would they be disappointed in me? Yes. Would they still hold grudges? Probably. But in the end, I had to live with myself, and I had to respect my own boundaries. I couldn't sacrifice my happiness and security for the sake of people who wouldn't understand or appreciate what I had already done. Looking back, I know now that I wasn't wrong for standing my ground. I wasn't wrong for refusing to keep feeding the entitlement. And while the road ahead was uncertain, I knew that it was the only path that would lead me to real peace. Peace with myself and peace with the choices I had made.